interlude.
Okay, we are back, and this is the piano interlude.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been handed a message that came in from Grover's Mill by telephone. Just one moment, please. At least 40 people, including 6 state troopers, lie dead in a field east of the village of Grover's Mill. Their bodies burned and distorted beyond all possible recognition. The next voice you hear will be that of Brigadier General Montgomery Smith, commander of the state militia at Trenton, New Jersey.
I have been requested by the governor of New Jersey to place the counties of Mercer and Middlesex as far west as Princeton and east to Jamesburg under martial law.
Okay, so they've been put under martial law. The Brigadier General speaks on behalf of the government, and this is coming into people's homes. It's a radio play, but something about the tone and of the time, it sounded plausible. Completely implausible to be invaded by Mars from Mars, but it began to sound plausible, and people who tuned in or were rung by their friends and said, "You've got to hear this," or were walking by someone playing the radio and picked it up, started to believe that this was really happening, and it snowballs. It creates a impressive effect, a contagious effect, and even people who are a bit uncertain and unsure still go with the flow. Hard to believe that anyone was deceived by this, but people were. I mean, a small percentage, but people were. Not everyone, of course, not everyone. People knew it was a radio show. Now, subsequently, as I was saying at the start, there have been many versions. There's the Jeff Wayne's disco version. There was the movie of it in 48, I think. There was the Steven Spielberg version in 2005 with that guy, whose name I forget every time. I swear, I looked it up again as well. What's his name? He's a Scientologist. He was married to Nicole Kidman, the Australian actress, which is probably why I just blocked him out, right? Because how dare an American marry an Australian actress, right? What on earth is his name? Someone? Not Keanu Reeves, but just as boring.
Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise, thank you. Honestly, I always forget his name. Anyway, 2005, Steven Spielberg was like super famous, right? For this 70s film about aliens, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, about contacting aliens, and they come and so on, and plausible. And then, of course, also the point of view alien character thing for kids, E.T., the extraterrestrial. But War of the Worlds keeps on being remade. It was remade 2018. There's one out this year by Mario Banassim, 2021, that I just keyed up to. I haven't watched it yet. Wanted to have a look at that and see. They have a pretty effective Martian, and they linked it to the Mars rover. This maybe we need to watch a little bit of that. Have I still got it on? Yeah, I have. So, right, we know the Red Planet and Mars and all that. I mean, there's Mars is in so many sci-fi films and so on. But in this one, what's really cool about the start is using the landing vehicle. Started this. I'm only killing. There it is. I'll keep the sound off so we don't get feedback. This is the Mars rover, right? A vehicle sent from Earth to explore the dead planet Mars. But as we'll see when we get to here, that planet is not dead. It has these aliens that owe something to the shapes of the Martians in Tom Cruise War of the Worlds. And here they're headed to an Earth satellite.
There's a signature on your port side, but JPL determines it may be from a low-emission solar event. Copy control, but we have no particle signature. Captain Peters will be conducting a maintenance walk and wants to confirm clearance. ISS, we do have a visual of something unusual on your port side. If Captain Peters is prepped for that walk, he may have a visual on what it is.
Mission Control, this is Captain Peters. There is something outside of the craft.
Captain, there's a large mass just off your port side. Radar and observatory telemetry are trying to approximate what it is.
It might just be dust blown over our fuselage from our evacuator valves, or... Wait, I do have a visual. It's dark. It appears to be... At 6:08 Standard Time, Ukraine's Delta...
Henry, you're holding the handset too close to the receiver again!
What I was saying was at 6:08 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Ukraine's Delta Observatory recorded exactly what you predicted. An increase in carbon dioxide and sodium in the Martian troposphere.
You went to the PA system for that?
Doesn't that confirm it once and for all?
Well, I'm just looking at these latest images.
And?
That was correct. Mount Olympus is going to erupt today.
See, I told you.
I just picked a heck of a day to do it.
I mean, that confirms it. I'm just trying to add a little fanfare, babe. You just made history. I mean, an eruption from Olympus Mons of this size is unprecedented. Most scientists thought the volcano was dormant.
Believe me, okay? I feel validated. After 10 years of eye strain tracking topographical changes and chemical signatures on Mount Olympus, I was not gonna miss this.
I take it Junie didn't exactly take it okay when you got called in.
She was livid. I promised her I'd be with her today for a post-surgery checkup. And you called.
Okay, I haven't watched this yet, so what to say? It's following the usual format of War of the Worlds. Okay, there's Martians are coming, right? We know it as in the back of our mind, but then we get into some small location in some rural part of America where normal people are going on with their normal lives and doing their jobs. But there's a product placement, right? If you look at his drink, it actually looks like some kind of Chinese drink anyway, but there's product placement, of course. So it's a commentary on that. I'm not going to go into this, watch this film, but it's interesting that over and over, we get more and more versions of the War of the Worlds. Like, it's such a productive story that for 100 years, 120 years now, this story has been available and inspiring people to think about problems here on Earth. I mean, the problem there was, I suppose, in 38, the threat to the American way of life and a kind of call for people to mobilize. Orson Welles was a leftist, communist thinker, debatable. His mother was a activist or organized in political movements and activity. He had also been particularly, where's the picture of him, involved in theatre politics, and had been pushing anti-racist causes, for example. He did the first all-black actor edition of a Shakespeare play of Hamlet in Harlem. So he was working with then the underprivileged, exploited in America. He was famous for having a weekly radio talk show in which he championed social issues like police violence, kind of Black Lives Matter, like 70 years before, and talked about union issues, and then of course went on famously to make to make Citizen Kane, right after War of the Worlds.
No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that human affairs...
How did that happen? Strange, the wrong clip. Citizen Kane, which starts with a kind of scary radio moment of the humongous lips of Kane, the main actor, splattered on the screen, right? I mean, this is a phenomenal image to put onto celluloid. The reason Orson Welles got to make the film Citizen Kane, he was given a contract as a director, basically with no restrictions, on the basis of the outrage or the notoriety, the fame that he got from doing War of the Worlds and his progressive credentials. Of course, it kind of backfired because he got into trouble because the character Citizen Kane was based on a figure from mass media that didn't like what Orson Welles had said about him, and especially said about his girlfriend. I think I mentioned her last week as the first woman to have a image sent across the telegraph lines, right? That was Marion Hurst, and the theme of the film revolves around basically the word rosebud is a kind of trick of the film, and rosebud was William Randolph Hearst's secret name for Marion's sexy bits. Crazy. The structure of the film owed a lot to the radio play, which is really interesting. I think the radio, I've spoken a lot about Citizen Kane and written on it, but one aspect of it is all I'll get into here. The experience of Welles, both in plays for radio and in the theatre, especially in Ireland, he spent time working in the theatre there and was very successful in his younger years, and played all the main roles, and kept interested in theatre all of his life, of course, and ended up playing Lear and everyone, but early on was playing Hamlet. something about the theatrical staging that was specific to theatre, and then also some of the aspects that were translated into radio, then were translated into the film. But as well as that, his political ideas. So in the film, if you take it apart very carefully, you'll see communist campaigning ideas, the mass media as a propaganda tool, and the image in mass media. So hence these huge leaps. I mean, more close-up than any close-up. This is the great more of the man. Although the weird thing about the film, and this is something that you could only learn to do if you were doing, you wouldn't do this in the theater, but you might do it on radio, is that in the very start of the film, the main character dies. Like, and then it works in flashback. Now that's something that I suppose you might get from radio play. You can't really do that in the theater. You can't have your main character die. Or it'll be very difficult to do that in the theater. There are no doubt cases where there are flashbacks, but you have to do it with staging and so on. Whereas in the film, it's set up, the first sequence, character dies, and then we're introduced to where that character lived, and kind of to explore his life. The next scene is going into the gate of his building where it says no trespassing, but the camera goes through the gate. Fantastic shot, actually, to have invented. The camera, many of the camera techniques were made by a guy called Greg Toland, the camera person working with Kane, and they were completely revolutionary. They innovated in film. The camera comes up to the gate and then passes through the gate. And you can do that with editing, right? But Wells and Toland, they did it. They wrote they did it first. And so many other things, like they made sets that were like the theater. They had, for the first time in film, the sets had ceilings. Why did they have ceilings? Where did they get this idea? For it to be more realist or realistic looking. But also because they had worked in theater, right? If you're sitting in the audience of a theater, you're not looking just at the proscenium stage, but you're looking at an angle. And they put the camera down low as well to get these shots that these innovations by Greg Toland, that get these shots that really had gave the characters real gravitas. They actually dug holes in the studio floor so they could put the camera down low and get these up shots to make a figure look more imposing. And that was the idea with Kane, right? They had to make him into this very imposing thing. But they start off by putting him in his amazing Xanadu house, and they start off with the newsreel. And I mean, so much of Kane's background, his interest in politics, his interest in psychoanalysis. That's another reason for the no trespassing. You're going to explain a man's life? How can you explain any man's life in a 2-hour film? But that's the gimmick of the play, of the radio, of the film. And it starts off with the sign saying no trespassing, but then they go into a series of meditations on how the guy's childhood explains his life, so to speak, because of this one object that he's attached to. As I said, he's done the War of the Worlds for Mercury Radio. Adorno comments about how the authority of the radio gets into people's homes. Well, in the film, he's using the camera technique, the new camera techniques, to create the authority of the figure by putting the camera down low for the first time and shooting up at this figure. He shows the authority of the figure. And then there's also the product placement in the radio show, but in the film. But here he's kind of making a commentary on that product placement. There's all the commodities that the older Kane has accumulated in his life and has in this palace, and this Xanadu is William Randolph Hearst really did have an apartment like that, a building like that, not exactly like that one, but it's called San Simeon in California on the coast outside of, well, between Los Angeles and San Francisco, maybe closer to Los Angeles, where he collected so many things from all over the world, and commodities. And we should talk about commodities. If commodities could speak, they would tell us about how radio is their great vehicle for getting out into the world, and in films, the product placement that they got, and in a way in the film, Kane is mocking that critique or that commodity placement, especially by this image of the snowball that the man dies within his hand. Right, he's holding a snowball, and I usually have one. Here's one. No, it's Vietnamese. Let's see if I can get it. Now, right, it's the tank from the Independence Palace, but it's a snowball on top. Snowballs have become this silly commodity that you even can buy them in Vietnam where there's no snow, guys. It's a bit silly, but anyway, it's the tank that beat down the gates at the Reunification Palace. So, do I have any others? Yes, I have a beautiful one here. This is actually a little house in a globe, and it's a sugar bowl. Right? If you turn it up, you can. There's sugar in there, not snow. But it's similar. It's meant to be a commentary on that one that Kane includes in the film. It's in the start of the film. It's in his hand when he dies, and he says Rosebud. It then appears irregularly throughout the film. One when he meets Marion, the singer. Was her name Marion? The opera singer, Judith. Yeah, Marion was not was the name of Hurst's girlfriend. Anyway, she has it in her room, and then it's still in her room when he kind of throws it when she leaves, and he destroys her room. He's wrecking everything. Must have been fun to do. He's dressed up in full character, and he's getting angry, destroying the room, and sees that commodity and picks it up and leaves. That's the one thing that calms him down or interrupts his mad, destructive freak out, and he then walks holding this thing. And it's from then on isolated, and his empire struggles, and then he's holding it when he dies. Walter Benjamin has written about the snow globe, Schnee globe, Schneekugel, snowball, as a kind of strange commodity, because what it is a frozen moment, what he calls a frozen moment in the he can interpret it as a frozen moment in the history of commodification. Now, he wasn't talking about this film. This film happens, he's dies before this film ever gets to Germany, right? In fact, before it's made, well, around the same time as it's made, Benjamin dies. But that throughout his life, Benjamin and Adorno had been fascinated with what the little miniature world in a little miniature frozen world meant, right? Like it was a symbol of how social relations, human relations between each other were congealed into a commodity, frozen into a commodity that was a scene fixed in glass that you could then use as an ornament. And of course, it was for sale. It was social relations congealed into one tiny image. An illustration of Marx's argument about commodity fetishism. Right? And that commodification was huge. The fact that the story of Kane and the object that he was really obsessed with, that explains to the audience, not to the members of the film, the characters in the film, they never find out the importance of this or the other object that we're talking about, is interesting as well. We find out about it, and we know of all the many things that Kane collected in his life, and he was a mad rich collector of artworks, and he never threw anything away. We see them at the end of the film, all stacked up, and some of them being burnt, and we see the one that gives us the clue at the end. I won't say what, but it's very interesting that in terms of radio's role in product placement, it's very interesting that Wells then uses that as the framing narrative for his first and most innovative film, a kind of critique of product placement by making the whole film about millions of products and nothing else. One man's life that they're trying to explain then gets displayed as just an endless collection of commodities, which has been then, this scene has been repeated quite often in many other films. At the end of Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom, the Covenant, the Ark of the Covenant, is stored amongst all the millions of other things that have been hidden away by the US in their kind of commodified Fort Knox. This is also a kind of critique of the commodity system, although it looks exactly like an Amazon store, doesn't it? I mean, this one in Kane does not. It's a whole lot of crates and things. It's chaos. But this looks like any distribution center for commodity boxes today. So it's kind of not exactly a critique anymore. It was prescient. Yeah. I'm really fascinated about how we do, I mean, forgetting about radio for a while, how we do come increasingly to define ourselves through objects. I mean, for good and bad, for bad mostly though, that we are displaced into objects. Like, my kids were mocking me just earlier today because everywhere we look in my house, there are books. I mean, and this is not even the main house that I have. There's a house in England full of books as well, where there's books in every room. And now there's books in every room, and even books in the kitchen cupboard. I've just started to use the kitchen cupboard shelving there because I haven't bought new shelves. And these books somehow, while they aren't me or my life, they kind of become that. I mean, I don't know how many of you do it. Perhaps you do, but I put my name in the things and I keep them. I don't throw them away. I put them on the shelves because they're in a way, of course, I see them as tools for work, and I'm fascinated by so many different authors and want to read everything, and I pore over old texts and correspondences and like, you know, I've got them here. I'm reading Engels and Lafarge's correspondence, which is like nearly a 100-year-old book, but fantastic, still brown pages and falling out pages, and it's not my identity yet. It's fundamental to who I imagine. And other people collect other kinds of things, right? I don't know what any of you all collect, but it's very common to be a collector of things. One of the things that humans do, it's become a mass response in some ways to mass commodification. My mum collected spoons. My sister collects owls, right? Somehow I think books are more sane, but sorry, sis. You know, other people collect broken old radios and old cameras, film equipment, anything. It's a whole subculture of collecting. What to say? What I'm trying to do is suggest to you that as sociologists, and to collect books, yeah, me too. Do you collect first edition books, or do you collect a different kind of book, a specific kind of book? Books on Robinson Crusoe, for example, or something like that. What I'm trying to say with this is that we can, as sociologists, we can start to bring some theoretical and analytical tools to bear and examine what we do through these media forms, mass media forms, like in images that we see in the War of the Worlds, or fascination with sci-fi, and we can bring an analytical question. It doesn't mean that that's absolutely true, that every person who's interested in sci-fi is really projecting their own problems into space so that they can think about them. But that is true a lot of the time, and it's worth thinking about that and exploring that by doing new work that questions that. I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about with the very many remakes of War of the Worlds is why does it get remade so many times? Why do people feel like they have to redo it when it was done so perfectly in 1938 by Orson Welles? Why do it again and again and again, and then do it really badly with Rob Lowe, Keanu Reeves, the guy whose name I forget? It's a real block. I think it's an awful version, that one, because in the end he runs back to his family and he resolves his being a bad father by fighting off the Martians. Why was it necessary to remake War of the Worlds so many times? And in fact, a great exercise, maybe it could be a way for you to think in a group of your, what you might make for this course, would be to remake a version of War of the Worlds for now that will also address the issue of why in each time it seems like there are latent questions in the text of the War of the Worlds that can say something about our present. So in 1938, it could say something about the end of the Depression and commodification, and the same as Citizen Kane could. Right? Citizen Kane was able to say so much about the frozen moment and so on, but you could remake it. Interestingly, Citizen Kane hasn't been remade. No one would dare. So many things are remade, and when they're remade, they're made in different times, so they can't be the same thing because they'll bring out different significances. So to make it in the 60s or in the 70s, it was about the Cold War, War of the Worlds. It was about the Russians. To make it in the 2000s, you might have taken on some anti-Islam or terror war aspect. And to make it today, it would somehow have to be about COVID, wouldn't it? The War of the Worlds. And different things latent in the story would come out in different ways. So what is it in the War of the Worlds that kills off the Martians, if not a virus? The reason why they die off in the story is that they get a virus, which is incompatible with their their Martian biology, and they can't inoculate. Humans somehow are naturally immune. But you might not do it about not want to remake War of the Worlds about COVID. So this is too close to home. Although as we'll see in a future week, a couple of weeks from now, we're going to talk about novels. Robinson Crusoe is the metaphor of the man isolated on an island alone, can be thought of as lockdown. So many different metaphoric ways in which we can think about social relations in the here and now through our mass media objects, our mass media, our art, stories. So the story is a metaphoric or allegorical, allegory, symbolized teaching narrative for us. So you might really want to remake the War of the Worlds as the invasion of commodities into our life, right? As Citizen Kane can be thought of, with the invasion of that whole world of commodities. Although the race for commodities and how that's taken over the whole world. Think of the recent Afghan bombing of Afghanistan here by these yellow aid packages full of Hershey bars, right? And Afghan woman here, you see in the image, is rushing to pick up these yellow objects. The just disturbing thing is at the same time, phosphorus bombs that were being dropped on parts of Afghanistan were the same yellow color as well. So if you pick them up, the phosphorus would explode and slap onto your skin and eat to the bone. By the by, doing artwork to comment on social relations is a huge theme. I don't know if anyone's heard me talk about Michael Landy before. Here's an interesting guy who had a project, and I'll kind of finish with this, talking about Michael Landy. In the late 90s, early 2000s in England, this guy who was part of the YBAs, Young British Artists, and they were doing like conceptual art. I want to talk about conceptual art as a kind of non-mass but becoming mass medium. He wanted to take on the mass commodity and did it in an interesting way. There was a department store that closed down because of recession, because of economic collapse, basically. It was a Woolworths, I think. I can't remember now. In the center of the city. And he hired this place for a couple of months, and it did a show that you would pay to go into, or actually, I think it was free to go into, but you could then buy like a postcard or something. Did a show called Breakdown. It was a installation-based work, right? He called it a work. And he was famous for making installations. But in this one, his installation comments on the commodity system, right? And what did he do that really made the art out of it? His artwork was himself. He wanted to focus on how he was attached to commodities, right? And these commodities outside of himself, as if up in space, in the space of the market, were his identity. And he wanted to somehow break that, right? He wanted to break down what his identity was by examining and in fact separating himself from all of the things that he owned. And what he did was bring everything he owned, emptied his flat and his office and apartment, brought everything that he possessed in the world, from his car right through to his old school reports and teddy bear and stuff from when he was 1 and so on, and brought it into this big room which is set up like a factory with conveyor belts, and put all these things in these boxes, and with his assistants, who were dressed in these blue overalls, basically sorted it all into small boxes. You see here his cricket bat and some other bits and pieces, and put them in through a machine, put them in plastic, numbered them, named what they were, and then ground them into dust. Right? Completely broke them down. Everything. Broke them down, these commodities, these things that he owned, into nothing. Including the car. Like he got metal grinders, and it was a Saab. It was like worth thousands. And including like other artworks that he'd been gifted, and his passport, and old bus tickets, and old notebooks, right? The things that he wanting to perform for in public. That's even weirder that he wanted to do it in public. A complete destruction of everything he possessed, that his wristwatch, his medical records, I mean, everything. And that's like hugely insane, brave, and like, all right, as a performance piece, it certainly attracted attention, right? And that was part of what he was trying to do, get attention. But and what you can't grind into dust then is your notoriety, your reputation, your identity then actually becomes that. But all the things that was his identity, he turned them into dust, and they just got rid of it. It wasn't even put into bags and sold, which is what many people said he should do. He should make this dust, which would be different colors or something like that, where you could dye it all uniformly. I mean, his clothes, his shirts, his complete, everything he owned, all his clothes. And of course, he had to buy some new things afterwards. But he lived in this place and slowly basically destroyed every single thing. The contradictions in that, of course, need to be examined and analyzed as well. I mean, he did it in a former supermarket, former shop, a Woolworths shop, a shop that sold basically everything. So there was some irony in that choice of venue. He did it on one of the major shopping streets of London, Oxford Street. That's also significant. He did it in a mechanized, industrialized way, right? By having it all catalogued. And there's a big fat book which listed all the things that are. So the idea of all those things remains, but not the things. But he did it doing it in an industrial way is also a kind of comment on the industrial production of things. Commodities are produced in a factory-like way. That's pretty special. And, you know, then afterwards he did interviews about how he really did feel like he'd lost himself, or he wasn't 100% sure. And then his former girlfriend was upset because he destroyed some things that were kind of sentimental value and so on. But no holds barred. He destroyed everything that he had. He kept nothing back. And other people said, yeah, you've got issues, mate. You're a bit crazy. But he's well known for that. Even 20 years later, we can talk about that phenomenon, which is astonishing, really, what it says and what it means about. Don't you think? Okay, does anyone have any comment on this? Can you imagine doing it yourself? Right, we've just talked about how we collect books or we collect spoons or whatever. I'm not recommending, and I would never, like, the set task for this week is to destroy all your things. Couldn't even begin to imagine doing that. But could you do it? Could you ever imagine if there was some reward viable, like if you could get fame, or you could get, I don't know, a new start in life, or some other special job or something like that, future work in the Secret Service or something? Could you imagine destroying everything you have? And could it be taken further? Could you also then somehow erase your identity, not just through destroying your passport, but all the records of your identity? Whereas Michael Landy made sure he kept his name and all of the fame that went along with doing this activity, but that could also go. The conceptual level can be erased now. We have ways to, there are even companies that specialize in removing your name from the internet if that's what you want to do, or so on. There's reputation management services. Can anyone? I'm going to stop so we can talk. Anyone imagine